Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Bava Metzia. We are up to Perek Zayin Mishnah Vav. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'elu Nishmad Neria ben Svetlana Ranbayev Eliyahu ben Burchai Israelov Chana ben Miriam Sason ben Rai and Yoshua ben Shifra Menuchatam began Eden Amen and Le'avdi ben Chaim lechaim v'da refuah shelemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa b'toch Shah Cholei Israel and the Chlama Merav Binyamin Old Zion Chai ben Dvorah. The Mishnah discusses whether a worker can arrange to give up his right or the right of other workers to eat produce while working. A person can make an arrangement for himself with his employer that he will not eat produce as he works, and in return the employer will pay him extra. Although the Torah grants a worker the right to eat as he works, he can give up this right if he wishes. A person can also make such an agreement on behalf of his adult son or daughter, meaning a boy over the age of 13 or a girl over the age of 12. On behalf of his adult Canaanite slave or maidservant. The Mishnah refers to a master who hired out his Canaanite slave to work for someone else. If the slave is working with produce, he has the right to eat from it, as he works just as a Jewish worker does. On behalf of his wife. The Mishnah refers to a wife who is an adult, meaning if a person's adult child, slave, or wife is hired to work with produce, he can make an agreement with their employer that they will not eat while they work in return for a higher wage. The agreement is binding, and the child, slave, and wife are forbidden to eat while they work, provided that they know about the agreement and consent to it. Since they are adults, they have enough understanding to legally give up their rights. Therefore, if they consent to the agreement, it is binding. In the following cases, though, one cannot make such an agreement. But a person cannot make such an agreement on behalf of his minor son or daughter, meaning a boy younger than 13 or a girl younger than 12. Nor on behalf of his minor Canaanite slave or maidservant, nor on behalf of his animal, meaning if he hires out his animal to work with produce, he cannot agree to muzzle it as it works in return for extra money. As we have learned in Mishnah 4, it is forbidden to prevent an animal from eating from produce with which it is working. He cannot make an agreement that his minor children or slaves will not eat while they work, even though they consent to the agreement, because minors do not have enough understanding to illegally give up their rights. Therefore, an agreement that they make is not binding. An agreement made by a minor is not legally binding because he is considered to lack sufficient understanding of what he is agreeing to, and therefore, since the Torah granted these minors the right to eat while they work, they do not lose that right even if they agree to give it up. And a person cannot make an agreement to muzzle his animal because it is biblically prohibited to muzzle an animal while it works, and this prohibition cannot be waived through an agreement. And that is in a Mishnah Vav. Mishnah Zayin discusses laborers who are hired to work with fruits that is neta revai, which may not be eaten outside Jerusalem unless it is redeemed for money. It is forbidden to eat or benefit from any fruit that grows on a tree during the first 3 years after it is planted. This fruit is known as olah. Fruit that grows on a tree during its 4th year is known as neta revai and may be eaten only in Jerusalem. If a person is unable to take the fruit to Jerusalem, he may redeem it for money that he takes to Jerusalem and uses to buy food to eat there. The Mishnah begins, Hasocher et hapoalim la'asot beneta revai shelo. If someone hires workers to harvest his neta revai fruit, harei elu lo yochelu. These workers may not eat from the fruit while they harvest it, because neta revai may not be eaten outside Jerusalem, and the employer does not have to redeem the fruit to make it permissible for them to eat, as long as the workers accepted the job, knowing that they would be working with neta revai. Since they knew they would be working with neta revai, if they expected the employer to redeem the fruit, they should have stipulated this when they were hired. For the same reason, they cannot demand that the employer pay them extra to make up for the fact that they cannot eat the produce. Im lo hodian, however, if the employer did not let the workers know when he hired them that they would be harvesting fruit from which they cannot eat, for example, he hired workers to harvest fruit, but did not tell them that the fruit was neta revai, podeo ma'achilan, he must redeem the neta revai to make it permissible to eat, and allow the workers to eat from it. Since the workers accepted the job expecting to be allowed to eat as they work, the employer must arrange for them to be able to do so. If they had known that they would not be allowed to eat as they worked, they likely would have not accepted the job. Therefore, if they are not allowed to eat, they will have been hired under false pretenses, what we call mikach ta'ut. A similar case, nitparsu igulav, if someone's cakes of figs, it was common to dry figs and press them together to form large cakes. So if someone's cakes of figs become separated and he hires workers to repress them into cakes. Nitpatechu chaviotav, where his barrels of wine opened, and he hires workers to reseal them. Harelu lo yuchelu, these workers may not eat from the figs or drink from the wine while they work, because the figs and the wine have already been fully processed, and a worker does not have the right to eat from food that is fully processed. As we learned in Mishnah 2, a worker does not have the right to eat from produce that has been detached from the ground once it is fully processed to the point when maaser must be separated from it. Figs are considered fully processed in this regard when they are pressed into cakes, and wine is fully processed when it is filtered and poured into barrels, as it says in Mishnah Maasrot, chapter 1, Mishnot 7 and 8. Even though these figs separated from their cakes and the wine barrels became unsealed, the figs and wines are nevertheless considered fully processed, and the workers may not eat from them. Im lo hodian, however, if the employer did not let the workers know when he hired them that they would be working with food that was fully processed, for example, he hired workers to press figs into cakes. The workers assumed that they would be working with figs that were not yet pressed into cakes and are therefore not fully processed, and they would be entitled to eat from the figs. However, the employer assigned them to work with figs that had already been pressed into cakes once before and therefore were fully processed. Me'aser u'machiran, he must separate maaser from the figs and the wine and allow the workers to eat from them. Since this food is fully processed to the point when maaser must be separated, it cannot be eaten until maaser, as well as the other necessary portions, is separated from it regarding the wine and the figs. And so he must separate maaser from the figs and the wine and allow the workers to eat from them. Although workers are usually not entitled to eat from processed food, in this case they must be allowed to eat because they accepted the job with that expectation. Similarly, if workers were hired to work with any type of forbidden food, if they did not know when they were hired that the food was forbidden, the employer must pay them extra to make up for the fact that they cannot eat as they work. And that is in Abotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.